So welcome everybody. It is January 9th, 2018. This is Michael Watson and my lovely associate Karen Hand is here with us.
Hello, good to have you here.
Yep. And this is the first meeting of the virtual chapter of IACT IMDHA of 2018. We have a slightly new format tonight in that we're starting at 8:30 Eastern Time and ending at 10 o'clock. So the schedule is a little different than it had been before, and that'll give us a bit more time, and hopefully that'll be a useful addition to the show. We're gonna have a little extra time before and afterwards as we develop the format a little more for a couple little features as well that we're going to work into here as time goes on. So watch for that. But we do got some announcements and things to start out with. Let me just begin with the general logistics and let you know that this conference that we're in is being recorded, and the recording will be available tomorrow. It'll be posted on the IACT IMDHA forum for those of you who are members, and you can go out there to the forum and and get it there. And it's also going to be posted on the virtual chapter Facebook group. So if you're not a member yet, go out on Facebook and just do a little search for virtual chapter and join the group. We post all of these meetings replay there. We've also posted, by the way, there a replay of the World Hypnotism Day. That was just a couple of days ago on the 4th. We did a 5-hour broadcast. We had 10 different presenters through the course of that call, and it was truly a delightful experience. So we put them together in a playlist so that you can see one of them, or you can see all of them, or however it is that you want to do it. So those are all out there for you. Just go to the virtual chapter group on Facebook, and you'll be able to find those. What else do I want to tell you? If you are a member of IACT and IMDHA, you can get CEUs for attending this meeting, and the way to do that is to go to the website for your appropriate organization and log in with your member credentials. And when you do that, there's a page that comes up that allows you to enter in CEUs that you've earned by things you've attended. Let them know that you attended the virtual chapter and you want to get credit for that hour and a half. And they will give you credit for it. And those of you who are members of other organizations, well, you're just out of luck, I guess. Or if you are a hypnotist and particularly persuasive, I suspect that if you talk to the powers that be and say that you attended an hour and a half program about hypnosis and that you think you ought to get some credit for that they will most likely agree. So that should work out for you as well. And
I'd like to mention one other very exciting thing, if you don't mind, Michael.
Please go for it.
Interstate training. With the power of Zoom, we can now do all sorts of things that we couldn't do before. And Michael is doing a wonderful weekend on, well, tell us a little bit about the emotional change work that you're teaching, Michael.
You mean this course in February?
Yes. Yes.
So it's a core transformation training. Core transformation was a process that was developed by Connie Ray Andreas. It was really something that seemed to pop up in response to some criticism that the NLP community was getting for being essentially a community of technologists that had no heart. Kind of took me back to the Wizard of Oz for a moment. I really wanted to have a heart, and when I saw the core transformation training that Connie had developed, originally it was called the Aligned Self. I just thought it was the best thing since forever. I really tend to be not only client-centered, but my whole thing is about evolutionary hypnosis. So I'm looking for things that really draw stuff out of a client, as opposed to the idea of a hypnotist sort of putting some stuff in. Transformation really takes people down to the center of who they are and finds out what's underneath the issues that are being presented in the therapy, whatever it is. I know some people that actually run a whole practice using just one technique. So anyway, we're teaching it here for a weekend in Orlando. I'm a licensee of Connie Ray's in this process. And, well, it's going to be a lovely thing, Friday and Saturday and Sunday. And that's Friday evening, February, my goodness.
9th, 10th, and 11th.
9th, 10th, and 11th. Yeah. And while I'm doing that,
Yeah, through the magic of technology, Michael will also be teaching that same class that same weekend in Chicago, because here in Chicago at the Larry Garrett Wellness Center, we're going to have Michael presenting that program. We'll be watching it, and I'll be here facilitating all of the practice work. So if you can't get to Orlando, but you want to take this weekend fabulous training from Michael, you can. Come to Chicago, or if you're in the proximity of the Midwest or in Chicago, you can take it right here in Chicago the same weekend, the same class, get the same credits, and have the same kind of practice. So how cool is that, that we can now do multi-state training, and we're going to be doing more and more and more of that. So if you're interested in joining us, let us know.
And as much as I love the idea of being able to do training online, core transformation is one of those things where I really like people to have a sense of engagement with somebody that's got some background in the process. And so to me, it's the best of both worlds to be able to teach it here in Chicago, and then have somebody like Karen on the other end to be able to facilitate people through the processes. So that's really a win-win there. And so those of you in the Chicago area, get hooked up, man.
Hypnosis and technology.
And or those of you who are looking for an opportunity to come to Florida and thaw out, February 9th, 10th, and 11th, right here in Orlando, and we'll be happy to see you here.
So, if we are through with the preliminaries, do you think it's time to introduce our movie star guest?
Sure.
I guess that it might be.
How often does a movie star stop by the virtual chapter meeting? Well, we have one tonight. Paul,
I have to tell you before you actually give him the microphone and stuff, that there is one. I'm really disappointed about this. Having a movie star on the virtual chapter, and this is the limitation of this technology, is I don't know how we're going to be able to get his autograph.
Well, I believe we could actually send out those automatic signing things and make him.
All right, great. We'll get it covered. We'll get it covered.
And the good news is my head still fits on the screen.
All right, yeah.
Yes, it does.
But we have bigger screens than we used to.
Yeah.
And bigger screens than the Koreans.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. We definitely must have bigger screens. Paul, if you don't know him, he's just phenomenal. A master hypnotist. He is an expert in life between lives and past lives, and just a wonderful human being. So without me telling too much about you, Paul, tell us a little bit about your background, because you've been doing this for an awfully long time, and you came to it through some interesting pathways.
I've been doing it about 30 years. I feel really lucky in that when I was 20, I really knew where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do, that I wanted to do healing work. I left university and went to Japan to study this alternative form of energy healing, a little bit like Reiki, and studied that 2 years there, came back and practiced it here for 15, setting up centers all up and down the East Coast. And it was a very Zen-like process for me. In the end, there was something missing that helped facilitate what came up for people. And hypnosis gave me a more direct way to help achieve the state we were achieving through this meditative practice. And like Michael said, in a much more client-centered way. So I never really practiced hypnosis as a putting suggestions in people so much as I did using it as a tool to help them find something within themselves. I never looked back from 20. And so I've been doing it all this time. And it was 18, 19 years ago when I got hit by lightning and had a brief visit back home. And it was through regression therapy, actually, with David Quigley. About 6 months after the lightning strike, that he came to my center to do a workshop. And because I was still really having problems after that electrocution, he used me as a demonstration for the class, and regressed me back, a somatic regression really, regressed me back to those moments just before I was hit by lightning and when I left my body. And it really helped to not only resolve the trauma that I was carrying, but helped me recall what happened in that dead time. So I have a particular interest now in doing regression therapy, both for people that have had near-death experiences, which is really the hard way to go, and also life between life regression that was developed by Michael Newton, which is a much easier, you don't need the trauma to get there, right? So we direct the person through a deep hypnosis to go back through childhood, back through the womb, back through a most recent past life to the death scene in the past life, and take them to those moments where the soul is actually leaving the body and going back home. And the main idea here is that while in spirit, while in this greatly expanded state of consciousness, which I think really is what we're achieving with hypnosis when done properly, moving beyond the conscious rational mind, moving beyond the analytical mind, first into the subconscious mind, where our habits and emotions and these sorts of survival strategies live, and then moving into superconscious, to this expanded wisdom that's beyond intellect. And people remember why they incarnated, what they came to do, what they're coming to learn. They remember history of lifetimes, what their soul has been doing over lifetimes to evolve. And it brings huge transformation, both on a physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual level for people. So that's really been my specialty since 2001, which was when the first time Michael Newton offered that training. After the lightning strike, I was trying to figure out how in the world could I ever bring someone into that state to achieve that kind of expanded consciousness, that kind of healing and awareness without the trauma. And it wasn't until I saw the LBL work that I said, well, that's really how to do it. Because the gifts, you know, when someone's in that state, are indescribable, really. I mean, me personally, when David regressed me back, I mean, one of the things I felt upon entering that spirit world was something we all can read about in a spiritual book, or we can strive for, and that's unconditional love. But how many times in your, how many times are you able to experience that here? Not so frequently. But there in spirit, I could feel it with my entire being and feel I brought a piece of that back and that lives in me, that I know it's not a concept or a theory. Mm-hmm. It's something that lives in me. And we talk about oneness. We're one with all things. It's a beautiful concept and it makes sense. But to really feel it, to experience it, to have a sense of self, but not being separate from anything, that's transformative.
Mm-hmm. So it's very
on the
easy
deepest levels
how that would happen when you're on the other side after the electrocution. But I hear you
mm-hmm.
saying that you get that same thing through hypnosis as well. That's
right. And that's the beauty of it, because 50 million volts isn't really a pleasant way to go there. It's rough on the body.
The insurance.
The reentry is difficult too. What's that?
The insurance rates for practitioners that do that are really very high.
Yeah, we use the Roger Wilder method.
So, can I ask you to back up just for a second, Paul? Because
sure.
So my understanding is that you had this experience of being struck by lightning, and sometime later you worked with David Quigley and got back to that.
Yes.
In the in-between time, did you remember what had happened, or what was your experience of it up until the hypnosis with David?
I knew that something transformative had happened, but I didn't really know what it was. I felt like a different person in a way, is the best I could describe it. I knew I'd survived a a trauma that most don't survive. But really, I think the first 6 months, I was just struggling to try to recover. I mean, I had terrible back pain, headaches, really bad memory loss. And there was some internal damage that we didn't know about. And I was really getting sicker and sicker. Finally needed some surgery to repair a leak I had in my colon that was making me, what was causing a serious infection. So those months where I couldn't work, I mean, I pulled into a gas station to buy gas for my car because I knew I was out, and my son looked at me like I was nuts, and he said, "Well, what are you doing, Dad?" I said, "Well, I need to get gas." He said, "You just bought gas." And it wasn't like you could jog the memory. The short-term memory really, I couldn't, someone came on my office, I couldn't remember their name. It still happens sometimes. Now it's a different reason maybe, but no, I couldn't function really for those months. And so it was the most counterintuitive thing that David did with me in the regression was he took me to the time where the lightning was entering my body. It came up from the legs and it went up through me and out of me into the car, burned out the wiring system in the car and went off the front of the car and hit someone else. And I was amazingly conscious. This is something people with near-death experiences talk about. That time seems to slow down. And I was very conscious and very aware of those, I guess, few seconds of the electrocution and I knew, I mean, the thoughts in my mind were, I'm wearing rubber sandals. I shouldn't be able to be electrocuted because I knew it was coming up through my legs. It wasn't until it threw me and I landed on my head that then I went out. Other people saw it happen. It was a sunny day. We were at a swim meet for my son, and there was a storm coming. I didn't realize, I know now, lightning can travel about 7 miles from the front of the storm to the ground. So we heard thunder in the distance, but didn't know it was serious or was a concern. And everything exploded. Anyway, so the counterintuitive thing that David did with me was I had resisted that electrocution with all of my being, as loud and hard. I mean, I was paralyzed, but I said in my being, no, and tried to force it out. And that caused it to lodge in my body. Uh-huh. And so what David said to me is, welcome it. And I thought that was a rather cruel suggestion.
Yeah.
But it was in welcoming it that it could pass through me and I could release the trauma.
Sure.
It was. Mm-hmm.
Pardon me. I noticed that Billy's had his hand up for a little while here too. So if he's got a question for you, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Billy.
Oh, the question is Paul, which.
Hey, Billy.
Hey, Paul. Good to see you, dude.
You too.
Where do we feel we are now? Where do you feel you are now?
Jersey City?
Yeah. Yeah, I could say the same thing if I was in Jersey City.
Well, how do you mean? In my personal growth or in work? Or?
Yeah, it's kind of like the present tense. We know, many of us know where you came from, and it's a treasured moment for many of us because of your NDE experience. But the thing that many of us that are therapists, and many of us that are working with experience, is the present tense of, as we see clients, as we see people coming in and just being awed by it all, Um, the feeling of where we are with it. I mean, what I get amazed by with my clients is, you know, where I am, not to toot my horn, not to get really excited by that, but just it gives me such an amazing centered experience of all that it is, and why I chose this life. And to tell you the truth, I mean, many of us look at you, Paul, and we're in awe of you. And because you've done this for so long, you've done this so well for so long. So, I
had to laugh the other day. Sophia and I were talking about our work, and I started off in a very broad field of energy healing and then hypnosis, and then began to specialize in regression therapy. And it's still a relatively broad field, I think. And then moved into specializing into past life regression, which is a much more narrow field, I think, than the general field of regression therapy. And in time, began to specialize in life between life regression, which is even a smaller niche in a way. It's growing, but it's still a smaller niche. And where my real deepest interest is at this time is in near-death regression. So that's even a smaller niche in a way. I'm not sure what I'm doing to myself in a professional sense, but taking people back to those moments, those forgotten moments while they're dead, helps them integrate that experience and remember much of the kinds of things that people remember in LBL. And so a particular interest to me is a couple of things. One is what's possible, what can be achieved in that super expanded state of consciousness. Because near-death NDEers come back often free of the disease or the condition that caused them to die. So what level of healing's possible in that state, and how can we achieve it without the death experience? Right?
Yeah.
So Eben Alexander, right? Proof of Heaven, neurosurgeon who had a viral infection of his brain and went into coma. He came back out of the coma and with an amazing story about his return journey home and free of the illness.
Right.
Anita Morjani died in the hospital of cancer and came back cancer-free. How does that happen? Right? What was her book? Dying to be Me, I think? It's amazing work. And so that's my interest now, is to explore. I was able to do a session for Eben. He's been trying since that near-death experience to re-achieve that state of consciousness. And through meditation and using sound and different techniques. But it wasn't until I did hypnosis for him that he got to re-experience it almost 5 years later. Right? And so Karen mentioned that we were shooting a documentary over the last few days. And the documentary is really about the afterlife. Does consciousness survive after the body's gone? So Michael Anthony, the director, is interviewing and filming LBL sessions, past life regressions, near-death experiencers, right? And so over the last 3 days, we filmed past life and life between life regressions. And they have on film now one of the clients going into this state of oneness, that maybe even beyond oneness, that she was saying, what was it? All is all. It's the all of all. How do you describe that?
Yeah.
But how transformed is the person when they experience that and come back?
Mm-hmm.
So I've only seen 2 people in that state now. That was Eben Alexander and then the one that I regressed on the weekend. But there's something there. And I want to learn how we can get there intentionally.
Yeah.
So when you actually experienced it, was there pain?
Okay. So the getting killed part,
Yeah, that part.
that hurts a lot. That's the most pain I've ever experienced. The being dead part, that's fabulous.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It's there's no pain.
And the follow-up to that is when you regress back to it or come up to it, do you feel pain in that hypnotic state? Do you have to go back through that again?
So that's one of the things I'm working on. It's a good question. I believe you can do it without pain, and I've done a couple now that experienced it dissociated. So the technique, I guess, would be to take them to those moments of leaving the body more quickly. The only thing I have to say is that if the person's suffering physically or mentally or emotionally because of the trauma, then there's value in taking them through that painful time,
Right.
to release it. And this is what Quigley did. He took me through it in slow motion. And he had me on the floor on a pad. And as it began, my feet started to move, and then my legs started to move, and eventually my whole body was flopping, really.
And
spasming.
Were you feeling pain as that's happening? Were you at that point feeling pain?
Yeah.
Yes.
It wasn't as severe as the strike time, and it didn't, so, and I was able to release it, but yeah, it was uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's upon leaving, and it's interesting, some leave before it happens. As the car is about to hit the telephone pole, the soul goes, I don't think I'm sticking around for this. Whoop! They dissociate.
Yeah.
It's one of the oldest survival strategies there is, I think, to pop out.
Sure.
So
well, and even if we're not doing past life or life between lives, we find in regression work that happens a lot too. Little children dissociate from trauma all the time and begin to live their whole lives that way.
Yeah.
So that makes perfect sense.
I think in regression therapy, I'll tell clients this when they come in, there's primarily 3 things that we're looking for. One is the stored emotions from the experiences they've had. And those experiences don't have to be from this life. They can be childhood, they can be womb, they can be past life. I actually talk about a small niche. I had someone in past life regression experience an NDE in their past life. How about that?
Wow. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Anyway, what was I saying? So stored emotion, right? And then we have these experiences, they have emotional charge, and what happens? We form beliefs. It's my fault, I'm not good enough, the world's a cold place, I can't trust, on and on and on, right? And these emotions and these beliefs, the emotions get triggered, and the beliefs are our operating system. They have influence how we operate in the world in many, many ways, right? Yeah? So finding those and changing those, releasing those, finding new, more appropriate ones, often they're not even true, the beliefs we form, right? And the third thing is the survival strategies. It's what did you learn to do to stay safe and get love? And that's the driver for so many of us, And we learn those things in past lives too. It's not just here.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the truth is, in Europe, when someone practices regression therapy, it's very rare for someone to say, I'm a past life regression therapist. They're regression therapists. The person comes in with the issue. They're afraid of water or flying or whatever it might be. And you regress to the source of that. You don't know where you're going. But you don't designate. I had someone in the other day came in for past life regression because that's what I'm known to do. He didn't need past life regression. He needs this life regression. But his expectation and the agenda is past life. It's the wrong tool.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That was a question I was going to ask earlier. You're starting to answer it now, and that is how you present yourself to the world, or how it is that you are known. Do people come to you particularly for past life and near-death experiences, or do you get the usual smoking and weight loss folks and all that stuff as well?
I get very few smoking and weight loss. I do still get clinical sessions, more clinical sessions, because of the body wisdom technique that I've developed. And I love having those sessions. But because both Sophia and I have chapters in this book, Memories of the Afterlife, people read that and they want to have that experience.
Nice.
And they'll come in, but it's really an advanced experience. I mean, if they've never done any personal growth work, if they've never done any hypnosis or regression, and they want to come and have this sort of Six Flags adventure, with all these different rides, that's a big thing to deliver when they go back to when they got beaten by their father when they were 6.
Yeah.
That's not the fun thing they came in for.
Yeah.
But that's what comes up and needs the attention.
You need to have a dark room in the basement for those folks.
Right.
No, I have a big cabinet for them, and for the ones who don't come out of hypnosis, they go in the cabinet too.
Very good. Incidentally, the Sophia to whom he refers, in case you don't know, is Sophia Kramer, his wife, and also an expert in her own right. So,
and I think are you here? I think she just came back. She just finished her workshop at come on in, from the Open Center.
And two.
She can't hear you because I have the headset in.
Okay, well.
We'll share a headset. Here. Everybody's on. And she just mentioned you.
Hello. Good evening.
Your lovely husband mentioned you, and I wanted to make sure everyone knew who he was referring to. So.
And hello, Sophia.
Hello.
That's Billy.
Hey.
We're very lucky.
So nice. Thank you.
So I'm going to go have my coffee now, and Sophia will continue.
I just wanted to sign on. Hi, Michael.
So, Paul, I do want to ask you. You said something important that I want to make a point of here tonight, in that some people do regression work, and I've had even students learning regression say, I don't believe in past lives. And I don't honestly care if they do or not. I think they all need to be prepared for it, because we can't determine whether our client will spontaneously regress to a past life. We need to be prepared for whatever presents. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Absolutely. My first past life regressions were really accidental. I was working in a doctor's office. I was doing hypnoanesthesia, pain management, and body wisdom. I stopped numbing pain a long time ago, unless it's an emergency or something, or a procedure. And I started having people focus on it and dialogue with it, really enter into a relationship with it rather than try to make it go away. And found relief often in doing that, and something deeper than symptomatic treatment. They'd get a message from the body about some lifestyle change, some food change, some partner change, whatever. And I think the first or second past life regression I did was I didn't know how to facilitate it. I'd read about it. I thought it was an interesting idea. I wasn't sure where I stood on it. This school teacher with 7 years of chronic shoulder pain came in as a last resort. I mean, they tried to do everything they could with her, including painkillers that she'd gotten addicted to, and nothing had really helped. And so last resort was one time with the hypnotherapist. And she spontaneously regressed to a past life where she told this story of being a slave who had a son that was starving, that she went into the master's house to steal bread, was caught, beaten to death, and in the process they stomped on her shoulder and broke it. And she felt that death and shoulder injury from that past life was what this was. When she came out of like I said, I was really surprised, didn't know how to facilitate it. I just remembered my instructor's words: just take them through the ab reaction, just take them through the ab reaction, bring them out the other side. I do much more now, of course, but that's what I knew to do then. And she came out and there was no shoulder pain ever again. That was resolved. And I said to myself, did she really have a past life? Was it a metaphor? That's what I said. Who cares?
Who cares?
It's resolved.
I'm going to try to log on here.
Okay. Yeah. Great. Thanks for joining.
This is
I'll try to be back in a minute.
What she did really have, unquestionably, was a pain in her shoulder.
right.
That was gone.
That was gone. Yeah.
I said, well, you better come back and we'll do another session and see. You know, luckily I didn't really damage the session, but she did come back and she said, I'm bowling again. There's no problem in my shoulder. And so I had that happen a few times. I said, no, I need to learn intentionally how to do this and find out more about it. I quit trying to convince people a long time ago. The truth is, I believe that with this deeper work, the analytical mind, the rational mind, it can only stretch so far. And there are some things it cannot fully grasp. And some of this work, it feels threatened by. I had a guy the other day in my chair, and I said, well, just observe your mind. Notice what it's saying to you. It's saying, no, don't do this. Ask it why. Because I'll lose control. The mental mind was just afraid of losing control. Yeah. Well, ask it what it's afraid will happen if it loses control. So we got through it, but if the mind feels so challenged by what happens, or if it can't fully comprehend it, it may need to cast doubt on it, and that's okay. Let's leave it that way. Leave it as a question mark. I tell people.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I tell people that they can gauge the validity of their experience by three things. One is, if you're going to tell me a story, if you're going to make an appointment and pay a lot of money and tell me a story, why that story? Right? Yeah. You're really going to tell me that one?
Yeah.
And the next one is, how much emotion is there? You know, I record all these sessions, audio recordings. People don't like the video so much. Is there an emotional charge? If it's a pure fantasy, they're not going to cry. They're not shivering in the chair. It doesn't have the charge. And the third thing is proofs in the pudding. What's the result? Did it resolve the problem? And if it does, who cares?
Right.
And if it makes them feel better and we say, yes, it's a metaphor for something, so be it. And maybe it is. Who cares?
Yeah.
I do have a question for you about your actual death, however. You said on the other side that it was, the client this weekend described it as all that is. Then what in heaven's name prompted you to come back?
Yeah. So many people who have near-death experiences are depressed when they come back because they're so much happier there. And that's a big question, is why, right? So I think you have an opinion about it, but I don't know if it's necessarily your choice about whether you come back or not. I think there are a number of things it depends on. In my case, I had a strong sense of not wanting to stay there and needing to accomplish something. Others feel a real draw or pull from family that wants them back, or an obligation to family, right? Some go as a kind of a reset to sort of get more clarity on why they're here, and then come back to do that. The unfortunate part is that when they come back into the human body and have to deal with the mental mind, we get that amnesia. We have difficulty remembering why we're here, right? Yeah. So, I mean, I was happy to come back because I had things to do. Not everybody necessarily feels that way. And I think helping someone reconnect with that, remember why they did come back or why they're here, and that they don't have to leave that behind, that they can carry that love, that energy, that connectedness with them.
Just knowing that it's there has
Yep.
got to create some wonderful emotion.
Yeah.
Just knowing that that unconditional love does exist.
Yeah. You know, there are many who long to go home, who don't want to be here, right? I think we often see them in our chair.
Yeah.
And I think this work can help them reconnect with that, have that experience, and then bring it back with them so that they can fulfill their purpose and be more comfortable in their skin and in their body and on this earth. Sometimes it's sort of the opposite of taking them out, but bringing them back in.
So you characterize once in a while past life and life between lives differently. Can those two things be done in a session or in a series of sessions separately? Are they always inherently together? Or are there two distinct things? Sometimes something happens in life between lives that's important, and sometimes in a past life that's important.
So, in doing life between lives, we always do it as a two-step process. And we'll do a past life regression with them first. This is to get them used to the regression process. It lets us as a therapist see how they operate. Are they visual, non-visual? Is it vivid or is it vague? And it gives us, because they're learning to navigate this more subtle realm, right? During regression, trusting the memories is a really big part of it working for them. And the other thing is that there's often other stuff that needs to be resolved, looked at, worked on before you go on and do the life between life session, especially if they haven't done other work. And I think that's where Michael Newton's methodology is really brilliant, because he always took the person through childhood first, and then into the womb, and then into past life. And so you can resolve a lot there, let them learn the process and get them ready for the LBL. When we do the LBL, we take them back through the same, or our intention is to take them back through the same pathway or same method, childhood, womb, and past life. And it's so interesting. You often see where you've resolved things on the way back in the first session. And then we go to the most recent past life. Sometimes they go to a more significant one, but our intention is to go to the most recent. We take them pretty quickly through it, not doing the interventions that we normally do in a regression, because we want to get them to the death scene and out of their body. And then the majority of the session is spent leaving the body and returning home. And the idea is that their guides and these other beings will actually do the therapy for them. We're the one that helps facilitate getting them there. We use every tool we have to get them into that state, and then we'll facilitate it. But we step back and don't do the interventions because the guides do it. Sometimes there are those who skip, who we start them off in childhood and it goes straight to past life, or they go to womb. And then after, in the second session, sometimes they'll skip some of the steps. And I tell them, look, these are stepping stones, but it's a very personal, it's a very individual experience. And so if I'm saying childhood and you're somewhere else, if you're ahead of me somewhere, just tell me. You don't have to fit the methodology, right? Yeah. It's interesting. There are some who will go into the womb So childhood is subconscious memory, right? And body memory.
Right.
And then we move from there into womb. This is the first soul memory. Subconscious isn't developed. Body's not fully developed. You have soul entering body that has its developing personality, but the soul has its consciousness, if you will, and its personality. And so some souls are like the one I had yesterday. No, I stay there with it the entire time. I'm helping that body develop. I need to be here. And others are, oh, the body's okay. I travel. Oh, where do you go? What do you do? Oh, I go back home. I'm with my guides. We're talking about some of the things that I'm going to experience in life. Okay, now we're in LBL. Did we go to past life? No. We didn't force them through that. They made it there that way. And we worked with it.
Paul, how similar or different, I guess, are the descriptions that people give you of their experiences in life between life?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There's been a lot of research done on NDEs, and there have been very many similarities. I think Raymond Moody was the first to start researching those, or one of the first. Mm-hmm. The people at the University of Virginia continue that research. They have some really fascinating research. If anybody's doing regression therapy, look at their website, Division of Perceptual Studies. And they have 30 years of documentation of children's spontaneous past life memories. Really fascinating. I'm working with them down there. I've done regressions for some of the guys there in the department, and they're looking at starting to do some brain studies on people during regression therapy. They've done some preliminary work, and it looks like the parts of the brain that light up during regression are not the parts of the brain that are normally associated with memory, but more with consciousness or spirituality. So it's interesting. I don't think I answered your question, though.
Yeah, I don't know. It was, your answer was lovely. Whether it fit my question or not, I'm not really sure anymore.
Ask me again.
I was asking how similar or different are the descriptions that people give you of their experiences in life and lives.
So Michael Newton, who developed this method, he worked pretty quietly for almost 30 years. He regressed and recorded 7,000 cases. And from those 7,000 cases, he wrote his first book, Journey of Souls, and then Destiny of Souls. And so he found many similarities. And that's what propelled him in his work. And then based on that, we're doing these. Now, he taught the first training in 2001 because he knew he would retire, and he wanted there to be other people doing this. And so we're finding since that time that I think the best way to say it is he built a roadmap for us, if you will, of this incredibly vast, beyond universe, to give us guideposts on how to facilitate this. But no one person or no group of people could ever fully comprehend or map that vastness. So I think we have some good ideas and know where to go and see similarities. But my impression is that this work is evolving also. Yeah. That what we're finding, we still have the base or the foundation, if you will, but my God, just think of the vastness of it.
People have a tendency, I think, to describe things in terms of how they are like other things that they know about. Yeah. So one of the things that I noticed just in working with clients, I had this the other night. In fact, I was working with this guy, and there simply did not exist a word for me to say to him what I was trying to communicate. There was there was no language for it, and so when it comes to reporting things like this, first of all, the lack of language has got to stifle the descriptions in the first place.
People are doing their best to translate their experience. So one of the common things is they'll say, I'm going into this domed building, and there are these kind of judges, although there's no judgment there. But these beings, they're columns of light, or they're in robes or something. And so I'll ask them, well, describe this rotunda, this building for me. Well, it's like a crystal. Well, it isn't really crystal, but it's like liquid crystal with sound and energy. And so, they're struggling to translate this. And I think for our minds to be able to, because it's coming through the mind, right?
Right.
As they're reporting it to us. So it's struggling to translate it.
Yeah.
And you're right. There are experiences beyond description, and there are things we don't have words for.
Yeah.
A person yesterday, her session in LBL, she had a real fear of death. And one of the things holding her, and I'll have the film of this in a few weeks, her fear of death was holding her back on her development. And she really wasn't learning her lesson over lifetimes, because her belief was that if she learned it, she would die. And she likes this life and this body and wants to live it. And so it's really inhibited her from progressing. When one of the things we ask in these sessions is by what name does your guide call you? What's your spiritual name? And her name, she struggled with it. And some people can't get it. And I thought she wasn't going to get it. And she said, the issue wasn't that she didn't know how to say it. And she said, my guide says my name is like the sound in an empty room. And the theme for her was about nothingness, and that nothingness isn't bad. And after she let go of this kind of contracted belief of herself and expanded, he took her into the vastness of the universe and talked about nothing and nothingness.
Yeah.
And then, of course, her name was the sound in an empty room.
Well, and vastness and expansion is exactly the problem, because language, by definition, languages are limiters. Words are limiters at meaning. And we're coming into this experience of something that is expansive or transformational, and they're bound to fail us. I've got another one. If I can take you back, you had mentioned that you might recall a while ago you were talking about the woman with the shoulder pain, and you didn't know how to do regression yet. But you didn't. You followed. You followed what you had learned, and what I recall you saying was, and you decided, I really need to learn how to do this. So for the benefit of people, particularly on the call, that might be relatively new to the hypnosis community, or those who have just never even explored this area, how would you recommend somebody that has an interest in these areas get started in the first place? What would you encourage them to do to study or to learn more about it?
I think probably most of the people on the call have the basic hypnotherapy skills. You need your induction, and you need deepening, and you need basic hypnosis skills. For regression therapy training, I think I have to give you a commission for this, I think, but Sophia and I train people in the techniques that we use. We run a training once a year here in the US. We do it in September and in November every year here in our home. We only take 12 students maximum. So it's a very personalized training with a lot of experience, supervised practice. We do childhood regression for trauma, this sort of thing, womb and past life. The LBL training is something separate. We do it once a year in Italy as well, in Tuscany. We do a summer school every July.
And so how can people get hooked up with you to know more about those things when they're coming up?
PaulAurand.com.
That's it.
PaulAurand.com.
Easy enough to remember.
Yep. Operators standing by.
As long as they spell your name right, because I've had people misspelling your name all week long.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
They want to spell it?
They want to move the U over behind the other A.
Well, let's not confuse them.
Yeah, we don't want to do that. So yeah, that's exactly right. So move that U back, and contact Paul Aurand at paulaurand.com.
I like that. Move that U back, because that's really what we do, isn't it?
That's exactly right.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
AURAND. Yeah.
And that's what you do, isn't it? Move that you back.
That's right.
what it's all about. You know.
Hokey pokey as well. That's what it's all about.
That's right. Tell me more. I certainly don't mean to interrupt your questioning, Michael, but I want to hear a little bit more about your movie, The End. What it's all about, what it's designed to do, who's it going to be available to?
Yeah. So it isn't my movie. I'll be a part of it. But Michael Anthony was inspired to do this. He lost his father. His father died 4 years ago, and set him off on this journey. And he is interviewing people doing research on this topic of afterlife, both NDE and past life. And with me, he's been filming sessions, so he can take clips of that and show the potential of regression therapy and going back to these near-death experiences and between-life experiences. So his intention, and he's traveling the world doing this, interviewing a lot of people. He's a funny guy. He's lighthearted about it, and he's got about the biggest heart of anybody you could imagine. I don't think he's trying to make money with this thing. He's trying to wake people up to continuation of consciousness of the soul after death, and explore the topic as a documentary. It'll be feature length. It'll probably be a year or two before it's released. He has so much footage. I don't know how he's ever going to edit it all, but that's not my problem. He'll show it first at film festivals, and then hopes it'll be picked up by Netflix or something like that, Gaia TV, something like that. I think Rich Martini did a film called Flip Side that was on YouTube for a while, and then you could buy it through Amazon, but Gaia picked it up. You can watch it on there. I'm in quite a bit of that, and it's a similar kind of thing where he's looking at different spiritual experiences and near death and between life experiences. It's well worth watching, I think. So this is a little bit along those lines, I think.
Yeah. It's going to be fascinating, of course. It's going to be fascinating.
I think.
But I think it's going to be fascinating for the general public, too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Bringing awareness about this kind of thing, both hypnotherapy, but also life after death, is so important, I think. Raising consciousness, however we can do it. I mean,
you talked about some of these clients having such a hard time explaining what they're seeing. Don't you think some of that is drummed out of us at the beginning? That we come into this life maybe knowing more, and as we grow and people say, "Oh, that's your imagination, you're making that up, that's not true," that it's all sort of drummed out of us, and we learn to ignore that as we grow on this plane.
Absolutely.
So it's hard for us to interpret it, even.
Yes, that's right. It's a real stretch. There's so much emphasis placed on the mind, on the analytical mind, on education, and obviously education is important, but there's much more to us than our mental mind. And there's a huge movement around the world, really, of people saying, well, listen to your heart, follow your heart. And I think it's really important, and it's really in the right direction. Mm-hmm. But I think we have to go even beyond that and follow our soul. Soul first, and then heart, and then the mind can be the computer that figures out, well, how do we do this? You know, we've got it backwards.
Well, even the first part of it, I think a lot of us are still trying to figure out what the difference is between a soul and a heart and and all of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or whether or not there is a difference.
Or whether there's a difference. Yeah.
I think it blends. You know, we make these boxes, and it doesn't work in a box, but I love to take people on the journey within themselves. I call it essential healing or soul essence, where they go through all those layers of those beliefs and the shields and the protections and the things that people said and did to them and the things they came to believe of themselves until they can reconnect with that core self, the authentic self, the soul essence. And once they, I mean, most of us over time find or feel that part of us is being threatened, and we lose track, we hide it, or we protect it, or we lose touch with it. And I think our work is about helping them go back in through those layers, reconnect with that. And then for me, real healing happens from within. That soul essence, that authentic self can then emerge, break through those layers. And then someone can feel it inside themselves and begin to live it and express it and act from there rather than from this or from their wounds.
Yeah.
There's a great little book by actor Blair Underwood and a couple of other writers, but several years ago, I believe it's called What Were You Before You Were Big? I believe that's the title of it. What Were You Before You Were Big? And they went around interviewing 3-year-olds, and that was the question they asked them. What were you before you were big?
Yeah.
And almost to the child, they had a story about being something that they could never even been exposed to in this life. I worked on wheels, or they had all of these elaborate stories about what they did. And the conjecture is that the hypothesis is that this is what they were in a past life. And they were still remembering it, still bringing it with them here until it plumbed out of them.
Until about age 7.
Yeah.
So are you all familiar with Ian Stevenson's work? It's worth looking at. So he founded this division at the University of Virginia called DOPS, Division of Perceptual Studies. And Bruce Grayson and now Jim Tucker is the director of it. And they've been gathering children's past life stories. And this is not with regression therapy. These are spontaneous memories. And they are researchers, they're psychiatrists, and they're researching the details that the children recount and proving it. They have many, many cases. So I was down there months ago working with them. I'll go down again at the end of February. And I met a family whose son was 4, and he was describing being on a sailing ship. Okay, is that imagination, fantasy? Did he watch a cartoon? But then he describes in great detail how one could make a harpoon. Now, he didn't know to call it that, but he talked about the stick and wrapping it and hammering the metal and attaching it on there. And then he was on a whaling ship, unfortunately, but anyway. He describes this intricate block and tackle system on the front of the ship that was used to haul the whale in. He didn't have all the right terms, but he knew that there were these wheels and the ropes went through it somehow that made it easier to pull it in. Where did that come from, right? So this is fascinating, I think. And yes, we lose it through socialization, through education, through parents saying, oh yeah, you're imaginary, friend, right? Well, I think there's something more to it than just imagination.
Oh.
And so our work as regression therapists is how to get past all of that crust, right? All those emotions, beliefs, survival strategies, and the analytical mind that would love you to believe that all you are is it, right? And so I think hypnosis is a safe and a effective and a really wonderful tool to help someone get past that. I don't talk about how deep are you anymore, I talk about analytical mind stepping back, not leaving the room, right? People think they're going to be unconscious. No, it steps back. It needs to be present to keep you safe.
Yes.
And it has to learn from what happens. So it should be there, but not running the show. And then the memories come from subconscious mind. We process that, and then we go into superconscious mind or soul mind. That's where the gold is. That's where the real power is.
That's lovely.
It circles back to something you said earlier. Is there consciousness on the other side?
Yes.
Oh, you said that emphatically.
Science is trying to prove it, right?
You
Doctors are having arguments about it. I'm glad they're happy to have the argument about it. That's not my job.
right.
Yes, it lives beyond the body for sure.
Yeah.
So Catherine has an interesting story and question for her. So I can't do it, Michael. Can you unmute?
Sure, I can. Hi, Catherine.
Hi, Michael.
Hi, Catherine.
Hi, Paul. So my question is, I did a combo, Life Before Life and Past Life Regression in the opposite order with Nancy Canning about 10 years ago. So I've done a lot of past life regression, and I'm a hypnotist, so she felt comfortable combining the two in one session.
Mm-hmm.
So I was in trance for 4 hours, and it was just lovely.
Mm-hmm.
When I was leaving, I was not fully back in this plane at all.
Uh-huh.
And I had to get on the interstate to drive home. I could only process at 15 miles an hour. I had to pull off the road.
Mm.
So I've always been curious to know if that happened because I was in trance for so long, or do people, when they separated out into the two sessions, first the past life, then the LBL, are they usually able to come back in a more integrated state?
I don't think it's about doing one session or two sessions. And I have people who have done other work or past life with someone else and come to me just for the life between life. No, I think it's more about taking adequate time when the session is done to help you integrate and ground and be present before you go.
We did all that, and I felt like I was back, but as soon as I got on the highway, I realized my awareness was still in this whole other expanded consciousness place.
It takes time. And some people come back more quickly or more fully than others. But if you were still that dissociated or that disconnected, then something was unfinished, I believe.
Interesting.
Yeah.
4 hours
Yeah.
is an awfully long time, too, isn't it?
It is.
Oh,
yeah.
it was an incredibly long time.
Yeah. So we tell people not to plan any big activity right after one, but people come from out of town. We don't want them going straight to the airport and flying home. It's best to spend the night, but you should be able to function. You should be able to manage. You should be able to manage driving. Yeah.
I tell people, if they're going to go, to bring a designated driver.
Okay.
That way they can stay where they are and let things process, at its own rate, rather than have to get back into this normal earth plane awareness.
Yeah. Leave your office and crawl into the back seat.
Paul, is 4 hours an inordinate amount of time, or is that typical?
Well, every LBL practitioner does it a bit different. But when I do LBLs, I allow 4 hours, but they're not in trance for the 4 hours. We spend time with the interview. That can be 45 minutes or an hour, depending. And then you have a long induction and the regression. And then I usually allow at least a half an hour for them once they're out so that we can have a cup of tea and talk about what happened. It's interesting. By the time they finish the between life and come back, those first childhood memories aren't forgotten, but they can be a bit vague. And analytical mind is not so engaged. So I don't like to analyze their session, but I do like to review the highlights for them. I provide them with recording that I ask them to wait a few days to listen to, let them really digest what they got and then listen. But I like to review the highlights to help refresh it for them. And that's also time for them to get grounded and back in their body and prepared to go do what they need to do. Get on the subway in Manhattan, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, let's see if anybody else has some questions too. By the way, Karen, can you clarify for me the instructions for how people can raise their hand?
let me find it. Sorry. Under participants at the bottom, right next to, there's chat, there's share screen, and then there's participants. If you'll click on that, there's a little sign that says raise hand.
It's on the bottom of the whole list of participants, or?
On the bottom of the whole list of participants, and you can click raise hand.
Okay.
I just clicked raised hand, and so Michael, can you see my raised hand?
I can.
Yes, so I don't need to ask a question. I'm lowering my hand now, but that's all you have to do.
So if anybody has a question, you can find that and raise your hand, and then we will open up your microphone for you. Or if you have the chat room open and you just want to write down there, I have a question, we will open up your microphone so that you can ask your question.
That's right.
That should be the
or give us some of you may have gone through some things too, and you have questions about it, or you just like to share your story. That would be interesting too. I think Michael asked it maybe in a different way. Let me ask it in this way, and it may be an entirely different question. When your clients come out, how do they characterize it? Do they tell you, wow, this was an amazing experience, or wow, I don't believe it, I don't know what that was? Do they have clarity in general? I know every client's different, so there may not be a generality that you can address, but
I think there are some. And again, this is one reason we do the 2-session combination, is I don't believe it, was I just making it up, are things you want to get out of the way in that first session. You don't want to do a 4-hour session that's rather expensive for people and have them come out of it really doubting. You want to clear those things up first in the first session. And it varies from person to person. I think for most people, it's quite transformative. They're in awe. They really need some time to integrate it. And I know for me, some of the insights I gained, it took me 6 months or a year to really get to a place where I could really live it in my life. I knew it, and it's beyond a cognitive understanding. There's an energy that one gains during these sessions, I think, that you carry that help you achieve it. But yeah, it took time to really live it or do it. But I think that for me, I really enjoy getting someone that has not read the books and doesn't have any expectation about how it should go. It's tough when you have someone and they're having a certain experience in the back of their mind and thinking, oh, I'm supposed to meet my council of beings or my loved ones because they read that in the books. Yeah. And then they start to wonder, conscious interference in this work is a big issue in all regression therapy. And I'd rather get as much of that out of the way in the first session as possible. And I had one yesterday. She really had difficulty in the past life. This is for the filming. It's a good example of conscious interference, the mental mind just locking down. You could just see on her forehead when she started to think and worry about things. And it wasn't, the mind was really resisting it, but it was trying to help her. But when the mental mind engages, then those more subtle planes, there's more subtle realms, intuition, inner eyes, inner ears, you lose that, right? And so yesterday too in the LBL, she had some of it, but we were able to catch it much more quickly and resolve it and continue because we'd had that first experience. Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, sometimes the mental mind still struggles to try to put the pieces together or understand what just happened.
My mental mind struggles all the time. I get that. Natalie has a question for you. She wants to know if are there cases when people come for the first session, their past life, and decide not to do the second LBL? Sure.
Someone I saw just wrote the question about the other film that's called Flip Side, and it's Rich Martini is the director. Some, and it goes both ways, some will come for the past life, and they get so much from it that they don't feel any need at that time to continue with the LBL. And some have a more challenging or difficult experience and don't want to go on. And I guess more commonly, if they don't go on and do the LBL, it's because there's something more they need to do first, right? And so it certainly happens. Yeah. And again, I'd rather have them have a 2 or 2.5 hour session and find out, well, I need to work on my conscious interference, or I need to work on some childhood issues, or I need to work on my relationship first, and then go on and do the LBL. Yeah.
Or they need to work on, yeah, like you said, current life issues before they're willing to even explore anything else.
Many times.
Yeah, there can be a lot of fear, can there not, about, gosh, what might I find out?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh,
Well,
I don't have the answers.
I mean, I know in my own experience, when I was headed towards that place that I now know we call counsel, there were these wise beings review our life with us, I instantly felt certain I was going to be judged, if not punished. And, you know, that comes from religious indoctrination. It comes from society. You know, we're led to believe, we're led to believe we're going to be judged there. And it's the last thing that happens there. It's a place of unconditional love and acceptance. I'll never forget, there are certain quotes, you know, that stay with you from some of the sessions. And I had this really successful businessman that came to do these sessions, and he was so blown away. He leaves his body, he arrives in spirit there, and he kind of looks around in amazement, and he goes, "There's no competition here." Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which could be awfully darn scary, could it not, if you thrive on competition?
Yeah, I had a fellow who came, again, very successful. He had a good past life, and he had difficulty going into LBL. He got stuck halfway, what we call the gateway. And I checked with him. I really tried, you know, you really want to do everything you can to have them be successful. And he said, no, I'm afraid if I go and have this experience fully, that my life will change so profoundly that I'll lose everything that's important to me. My work, my job, my wife, my family was his list, in that order, actually. And so I said, you know, in my experience, that's not what happens, but I hear what a big concern that is for you. So, you know, go home and think about it, sit with it. And when or if you feel ready to take that risk to do it, then come back. And he did. He came back, I don't know, it was about 6 months later, 4 or 5 months later, I think. And he had a beautiful session. But yeah, we come with these preconceptions or beliefs, and transformation's transformation, right? I mean, we see it every day in our clinical work. 2 people are stuck in their illness or their beliefs, or, yeah.
I really want to change, but don't make me fundamentally different than who I am.
just on the surface, a new hairdo.
Yeah. So Paul, Catherine has her hand up again. Can we give her another question here?
Absolutely.
All right, Catherine.
She's
I'm sorry, Catherine. I thought I had your mic off. There you go.
Okay, there we go. Going back, when I had the LBL, my experience really didn't follow similarly to what had been in the books. But because I've had so much experience in other states of consciousness, I was just letting it unfold and trusting it. So how would you help someone to just be able to trust the flow of the impressions that they're receiving or accessing?
Yeah. I start with that in the pre-talk. I include it in the induction, and I include it during the session. And so there are some simple understandings and suggestions about trusting the images, the impressions, the feelings, the memories as they come, and saying them just as they are without any editing, without any analysis. And I talk a lot with the person before the session that although there are many similar patterns that people experience, it's a very personal, very individual session, and just let it be their own session and not try to conform to methodology or the book or some of these other things. It's a very powerful personal journey. And we know some of the things that can happen, but there's a great variety too. And I think that's the beauty of it. Just look at the screen now of all the different faces, and each soul is just as different, and each individual's experience is just as individual and different. I never want to be in the position of trying to fit the client into the method or into the framework. I think, Michael, you started off. You started off by saying client-centered, and I think it just comes back to that. It's transpersonal. It's the individual's experience.
Nice.
Well, one of the things that happened for me was I got this imagery of an old-fashioned coffee bean grinder. And what it was telling me was that I was being ground down into a diamond. I was having some pretty yucky things going on in my life. So that's the metaphorical image that came. When I left there, maybe, I don't know, a week or two later, I was in a Chinese grocery store. And they had an old coffee mill grinder for $30. So I bought it, and every day I turned the wheel, saying I'm the one who's turning the wheel of my life now.
Wow.
I had that coffee bean grinder for years and years and years.
I got chills when you say that.
Yeah, it's quite wonderful.
Nice.
And guides often teach through metaphor.
Right.
They really do. And, you know, one of the things we tell people before starting one of these sessions is that guides can appear to you however they want to appear. Mine showed up as a redwood tree. I was like, really? I said, well, you like redwood trees, don't you? You know? And how they behave or interact with us, they're teaching us. It's role play. And so if they're stern or if they're goofy, I mean, yesterday the person's guide's name was Jerry. And every time she said Jerry, she cracked up. And that was the whole point, was that this very stuck, somewhat stubborn individual, not in my terms, but in her own terms, the guide made her laugh. And so, okay, you're going to call me Jerry. And every time she said Jerry, she got the biggest smile on her face. And so this is, again, how he was teaching her.
And don't you think that'll be a post-hypnotic, that every time she runs into a Jerry forevermore, she will get a nice little smile?
Well, the entire camera crew kept teasing her about Jerry the rest of the evening, so I suppose.
And you know, I've never met a redwood tree that was stern or unkind. By the way. We have one more question. We have Natalia has a question for you here. So Natalia, I'm opening up your microphone. Are you with us? Oh, try again.
Yes, I am. Yes. Okay. Good morning for me. For me, I don't know. Good evening for everyone. It's like, sorry, I don't want to show my face too much because I'm not really presentable. It was 4:30 a.m. in Nairobi when the session started.
Where are you?
Nairobi, Kenya.
Okay.
Well, you're presentable perfectly any way that you are. What's your question for Paul?
Yes, question for Paul is, I watched your Life Between Life regression at Findhorn,
Mm-hmm.
and it was very beautiful session. The client was very visual. She could experience, I mean, even I could in a way see what she experienced. How, in practical terms, because I'm a clinical hypnotherapist and I learn regression therapy now with Sasso. In the practical terms, how would you go if the client is not visual? What would you do?
Yeah.
What tricks of the trade would you use?
Really good question. So let me say first that I do have the YouTube channel, Paul Aurand, and there are videos on there of this work, and you're welcome to watch those. I am not the Paul Aurand that talks about guns and Jesus, because there's one of those too. So Paul Aurand, Holistic Healing Center, and you'll find it on YouTube. So yeah, I think for regression therapists, it's one of the biggest challenges when you get someone who's non-visual, and we know there are many non-visual people, and most people will come in expecting to be visual. They come in expecting to see the 3D IMAX Walt Disney movie they read about in the books. And it's one of our biggest challenges in doing this work. And so we talk to them before we start, and say that the memories come through all of the senses or some combination of the senses. And I'm not especially visual, so it was hard for me in my first regression. I talk about my own personal experience of trying to see and not seeing anything, feeling like it wasn't working, and having to learn to trust what I was sensing and what I was feeling. And I use an example. My clients have been probably better teachers than my instructors. But I had a client early on who I had in my chair, I taking back, and that dreaded moment when we asked for feedback and they say nothing, right? And I've learned since I was dead that as long as you're alive, you're experiencing something. And so I'll always challenge the nothing. And I'll say is you have to be experiencing something. Most people telling you that they're experiencing nothing are telling you they're not seeing anything. It's blank. They're not visual. Or they're telling you that what they're experiencing is different than they expected to experience. They're feeling fear or anger when they want to see an angel or a guide, right? And so I tell them the story too of the guy in the chair that said nothing. And I said, I'll often shift then to kinesthetic. Well, what are you feeling? And he said, well, my neck is bothering me. Did your neck bother you before we started? No, but it's really distracting me. So he was getting a body memory, right? So I said, well, just feel it. What's it feel like? Well, it feels like someone has their hands around my throat. He's got me down on the ground. It's a homeless guy. He's come out from under the bridge in the park where I was walking. I don't think I'm going to make it. Nope, I'm not. I'm above my body, right? So here he was at the death scene in a past life telling me I'm experiencing nothing because he wasn't seeing a movie. So check with them about what they're feeling. Are they feeling an emotion? Happy, sad, angry, afraid? Are they feeling something physical in their body? Is a good way to go.
Nice.
Yeah.
And
Nice.
sometimes it can be auditory too. I'm very auditory. I mean, so sometimes I can hear it.
Yeah.
I did a session with Paul, as a matter of fact, a soul releasement session, and I hope you don't mind if I share this, Paul, but I heard the soul leave when rain started. I heard rain on the window.
Oh, yeah.
And I said to Paul, there she is. She's now on the outside of the window. And that was my proof that we had success. And long after the session, when Paul and I talked about this, he said there was a massive thunderstorm that happened at about that time. Everything turned dark. And yes, there was rain beating on the window. But my sense at that time was very auditory that brought me into the realization of the experience. So they can have it in any number of ways.
Yeah. So have them scan their senses as you take them back.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
What you described, Paul, is that went from a feeling in the neck to above my body now. It turned into a visual.
That was the doorway.
Yeah.
That was the key to it. Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Well, this is lovely. There was one more question out here, and I'm afraid we're not going to be able to get to it because it's rather extensive, and it's just somebody mentioning. Apparently, there's some malpractice insurance companies that won't insure hypnotists who do life regression therapy. I don't really know about that, and to really cover that would take quite a bit of time. But it's actually time for us to wrap up. So I just have to apologize to Dr. Tiwari who put that question up there and say, if you want to write us, we can look into it or something.
Michael, you can get it through IACT or IMDHA.
There's I'm sure, and even with no restriction about doing regression therapy, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it is that time already. Now this is the first time that we've had a whole hour and a half.
I could only go. I could not come on via Zoom. I had to go with the telephone.
So this is the first time that we've had a whole hour and a half, and it's gone really well, Paul. I appreciate how much you brought to us. It would be lovely to have 2.5 hours or 3.5 hours, but as it is, we have to let people get back to their lives. So hang out just for one more minute. while I just make these little closing announcements, that's just to remind people we are recording. This recording will be available tomorrow on the IACT IMDHA forum, and it will also be posted on the virtual chapter Facebook group, so you can get it there. It's actually going to be posted with a link from YouTube, so there will be a YouTube video that if you want that for any reason, and Paul, you might want to use it for something, feel free. You know, it's there for that.
Great.
And you can get CEUs for being here by contacting IACT or IMDHA and saying, hey, I was here, I want my time. And that will be easy enough. Next month, we meet on the 13th of February. We're going to be talking with Marilyn Gordon. And, well, she's going to be talking about some super duper stuff about healing. Let me see, what was the spectacular super conscious healing power. And I think it'll be a really interesting evening. So February 13th, the day before Valentine's Day, you can get all the healing in that you need, and then go out and celebrate with somebody that you have fallen in love with. So see us next month, and same time, same bat channel. And in the meantime, now here, Paul, as a first time guest on our program, you're about ready to receive a real blessing, a cacophonous delight. Because what I'm going to do now is give everybody a chance to say goodbye to you just by unmuting all of the microphones at the same time.
And
Okay, hold on.
before you do that, can I say
Paul.
one?
Thanks, Sophia, for being there.
Hold on. What do you want to say? Before I do that.
Go ahead, Paul.
We have a mentoring program for hypnotherapists that we run once a month on Zoom. And if we're just finished, we do a 6-month cycle. We're just finishing that. If anybody that's on is interested in mentoring, just contact me through the website.
PaulAurand.com or
PaulAurand.com.
What's the website?
Yep.
Yeah.
PaulAurand.com.
That's it. Great.
Back to you.
All right. So.
And thank you for what you guys are doing. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Okay. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thanks, everybody.
Love
Thank you, Michael. Thanks, Karen. Love and light and happiness to all. Yeah.
Yay.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
Awesome. Happy